Benedicite Dominus, and welcome to question 152 of the Secunda Secundae. The topic for this lecture is virginity, and I am Dr. Thibault. So we are looking at the cardinal virtue of temperance, and then now the subjective parts of temperance. We are on the last of the subjective parts, which is chastity, and we are looking at the part of chastity which St. Thomas has put in as virginity. And lastly, we'll be getting into lust in the next video. So if you're looking forward to lust, stay tuned. St. Thomas defines virginity as the integrity of the flesh. Now, virginity takes its name from viro, which means freshness. So a virgin is fresh. Now that sounds a bit demeaning in the modern day, but I think if it is perhaps not because it's understood in its Aristotelian biology perspective. If a person is very lustful, if a person has a lot of sexual passions and desires, you can kind of picture this in the Looney Tune cartoons or Disney. A person is very hot, right? They're very, a guy gets a kiss and the steam blows out of his ears or the steam comes out of the neck, right? A person's very hot when they're very passionate, especially in a sexual way. Whereas virginity is very cool. It's very in control. It's very relaxed, right? So often in these types of cartoons you would see the males who are all passioned up and hot, and the cool woman is just kind of casually walking down the street. This is the woman, the image of the woman in virginity, in freshness, in viro. This is that image. Now, men can also have freshness as well, being cool and relaxed. It's not strictly for women, although we often think of virginity in the context of women, and some of that is the biology, which we'll get into. Because the three parts of virginity, according to St. Thomas, is first the parts of the body, which is the seal of virginity. Now, men don't have a seal of virginity, right? There's no biology within men which seals their virginity. It just doesn't exist. Now, it also concerns the soul and the body. It's this relationship between the body and soul. So if a person is voluntarily entered into these sexual relationships of the pleasures, they have a resolution of the semen. The woman has received semen, which St. Thomas says is very pleasurable. It provides pleasure. I'm not sure that is biologically accurate today to say that the actual physical semen gives any type of actual physical pleasure to women. But we're dealing with Aristotelian biology. What we can take from it still is that there is that relationship between the body and soul. So although virginity is an integrity of the flesh, the relationship between the flesh and the moral soul are interconnected in this second part. And lastly is that third part, which is entirely of the soul, which is having that mindset, that leisure for seeking nothing but the pleasure in God alone. So this is a completely spiritual approach. So there's the bodily, there's the spiritual, and then there's the commingling of body and spirit. So it's kind of interesting that intermingling. Now, St. Thomas says the first two deal with the accidental. Primarily, the first one is dealing with the accidental quality and the material quality, whereas the third is about the formality of virginity, the form of virginity, which aims at its final end. The final end of virginity is pleasure in God alone. Right? That's the end that we're aiming for. So if a person is only a virgin in not breaking the seal of virginity, they are materially, physically a virgin, but if it's not aimed at the formal, it's not in any sense moral or spiritual. So there is a connection between them. Also, this is an interesting point, is that if a person has been violated in some way, or by accident a person has broken the seal of virginity, as they say, but not in any sexual way, or if they were raped, this does not exclude them from being virgins, because there was no pleasure, there was no passion, there was no heat, right? Remember, virginity is about freshness, that lack of heat, that sexual passion of heat. There was no passion of heat, there was no pleasure, there was no seeking. It was just the accidental material element has broken. Of the three, that's the least important. That's the least important thing, is the physical breaking of the seal of virginity. That alone does not make a person holy. Sometimes people who pick on virginity, but even Catholic feminists, they can kind of focus on this first part as the most important part, is saying the church is so obsessed with that breaking of the seal. It's actually not. Right? Of all the forms of virginity, it's the least important. It's the accidental material quality. It's really about the other, the spiritual and the moral aspect that are more important than the physical. And there really shouldn't be a stigma for somebody who was raped in terms of virginity, because it's not something that was chosen, and a person hasn't lost any virtue when they were raped, right? They didn't lose any virtue. The rapist has lost virtue, but not the person raped. The second article is the question, is virginity lawful? And I think St. Thomas is pointing this out because in ancient Rome, there were emperors who made virginity unlawful, illegal, because they wanted more citizens. They wanted more people. Right? It's okay to be a virgin for a time, but not for your whole life, because we need you to procreate. Now, St. Thomas, he has a different interpretation, clearly, than the Roman emperors. As a virgin himself, a celibate himself, he has a different perspective. He said it's good to abstain from certain good things for the sake of the bodily good, or for the contemplation of truth, according to right reason. So, food is good, drink is good, sex is good, but to abstain from it for the sake of the body, or for the sake of spiritual contemplation, or for penance, if it's done according to right reason, then it's good, right? So then it's good. So can you lawfully remain a virgin for life? Well, if it's according to right reason, if the reason why is for the higher goods, then yes, right? If it's just because you don't like people, well, then that's not really according to reason. Now, abstaining from sexual pleasures is more, it frees oneself up more for the contemplation of the truth, and for, as St. Thomas says, leisure for divine contemplation. So, and he's using St. Paul as an example here. St. Paul says, married people are very involved in the affairs of married life, versus being a celibate, you are only worry about the things of God, right? So a virgin isn't raising children, she's not worrying about her husband, she can dedicate herself to divine contemplation, and likewise for men. Is virginity a virtue? And St. Thomas says yes, and I think this is a very good answer. He says, as chastity, recall chastity is kind of that fidelity to sex in the right order, which would be in marriage, right? So if you're not married, you're celibate. That would be the right order. And if you're married, then you're only having sexual relationship with your spouse, right? So that would be what chastity dictates. Now, chastity is more similar to liberality. To get this, you have to go back to justice. the cardinal virtue of justice. There's a section on liberality. I forget what question number it is now, but you can look it up pretty easily. Liberality. Liberality is giving money in a way that is fitting, good, right? You're giving money to charity, you're helping out people, you're doing good things with your money. It's doing it in the right way, right? Using money in the right way. It's not just using it in a selfish way, but in the way that's best. Using money well is liberality. That's very similar to chastity. Using sex well, in the right order, in the right way, with the right people at the right time. Right? This is what chastity is, right? This is about kind of ordinary virtues in some sense, because it's about just living a balanced life. But we have a goal of this kind of magnanimity, right? This bigness of spirit, this grandness, this big gestures. And for that, we have things like magnificence, which is giving large sums of money in very meaningful, impactful way. Giving the money to start an orphanage, giving the money to support a community of nuns, giving the money to build a church or to start a school. Big steps. In ancient Rome, it would have been giving the money to build a road or an aqueduct, right? Big output. Virginity is like that. It's not just living, doing what you can do. It's living chastity in a big way, right? It's giving all of your sexual pleasures to God alone, right? That's a big undertaking. That's like magnificence in that regard. Now, if you go back to magnificence, and this was under fortitude, you would see that, can a poor person be magnificent? Kinda, but not really, right? Magnificent person can try to give a big amount, but they don't have a lot of money, so they can have the intentions of being magnificent, right? They can kind of develop the habitus of being magnificent by giving a large amount in their life, but it's not going to really be a big impact. Same thing with virginity. If a person has had sex a number of times before and now they want to give themselves to virginity, well, it's not really in a big way, right? It's still a good attempt. It's like a poor person trying to build a school, right? It's a good attempt, but it's not going to get you there. Not that you shouldn't try, but it's aiming big, right? That makes people feel very uncomfortable today because it may make somebody feel like they're excluded. But these virtues are about living big, right, and doing what it takes. It's unfair, yes, but it's about preserving that virginity in a grand way, right? And this is different than just like you're 16 years old and you're a virgin. In some ways, that's more chastity. A virgin, St. Thomas points to, St. Augustine points to too. We don't praise virgins for being virgins, but because their virginity is consecrated to God. So in that way, virginity isn't just, I'm a virgin until I'm married. Yes, but in some sense that's more chastity. Virginity is that like a vowed virgin, a consecrated virgin is what St. Thomas is really talking about more. It's an excellence because it requires self-control, belief in God, in contemplation towards God. It's a tremendous act of faith, right? And that should be commended. It's a commendable thing to put. Anytime somebody puts aside their earthly pleasures for the divine, is a beautiful gift to God, right? An act of love. Now, can there be born again virgins? The answer is not really. No. Right? A person can recommit themselves to virginity, which is good. It's wonderful. But as St. Thomas points out, that big act of magnificence, the big act of virginity, is just not possible after one has decided not to, right? It's still good, but it just doesn't have that degree of excellence, right? It's just not. That, the exception being somebody who was raped, right? That person didn't choose. But if a person has gone into heat, right, the heat of passion, and have engaged into it, and now they decide they don't want to do it again, well, that's okay, but they did do it, right? And then mentally, you can probably imagine it again, right? You can fantasize about it, right? It's about keeping that coolness throughout. Now, is virginity more excellent than marriage? And again, might not be a popular answer, but St. Thomas says yes. Jesus chose a virgin for his mother. Jesus himself was a virgin, which we often don't hear men called virgins, but St. Thomas calls Jesus a virgin. And virginity is directed at the good of the soul in respect to the contemplative life, which consists in thinking of God alone, right? So that's married people are worried about things of the flesh, all right, paying the bills. Virgins are worried about God alone. Anytime you have a situation where it's give yourself to God entirely, it's going to be better than giving yourself to God part-time. It's just how St. Thomas writes the Summa, and I think there's probably some common sense in there. Now, is virginity the greatest of virtues? And St. Thomas says, let's look at excellence in two ways, to excel in two ways. One is in a particular genus. So in terms of chastity, so under this category is people who are chaste, ordered sexual activity to its right ends. Widowhood, somebody who was married but their spouse died, so now they're going to remain unmarried. And then virginity. Well, of the three, the greatest of these is virginity, because they have forsaken their own pleasure, right, their own passions, for the sake of God. And although the other two are perfectly good and holy, virginity has the highest ideal, therefore it is most excellent. But in terms of virginity, in regards to all other virtues and all other ways of living, no, it is not the greatest of the virtues. So, and St. Thomas gives as an example, a martyr gives their whole life, right? They hold absolutely nothing back. Well, that's more than a virgin who holds back sexual passions, right? They've only held back sexual passions in order to have leisure to contemplate the divine. Well, leisure to contemplate the divine is fine. Holding back sexual passions is fine. But a martyr gives it all, right? So that's why people like St. Agnes or St. Lucy are both virgin and martyrs, are more highly exalted, more for martyrs than for virgins. And monks hand over their will, right? I guess this would be nuns too. Monks and nuns, they hand over most of their life, not just their sexual appetites, but even their will, right? Under obedience, they don't even have control over their own lives. So that's an even bigger one. And then taking this from Article 4, response to Objection 2, St. Thomas says, perhaps a person who is not a virgin has some more excellent virtue. That kind of keeps it a little bit open-ended, right? Just because a person has given themselves for the leisure of contemplating divine things, there are still other people who are not virgins who have excelled in perhaps other ways, right? Even some great saints, they are widows who then found religious communities or things like that. Well, they're a widow, so they're not a virgin, but they might have done great things, right? St. Augustine was probably not a virgin before he became St. Augustine, right? He had his affairs, and St. Augustine might be a greater saint than some virgin. So virginity is not the highest, although it is excellent and admirable. And if it's done well, it's if that's your vocation, then that's what you should do. Right? That's just because you haven't been martyred doesn't mean you're not. You don't have the habitus to be martyred if the occasion came about. So lastly, virginity has three parts. There's the physical element, there's the spiritual element, and then there's the bodily moral element, right? The three elements. Virginity is lawful. It's not always lawful in certain cultures, but it's lawful under Catholicism because it seeks the higher good. Virginity is a virtue because it's one, through the use of reason, withholds their sexual passions in order to achieve some leisure for the contemplation of the divine, right? A complete love of God, finding pleasure in God alone. Well, that's a high ideal, right? So that's a virtue. And because of that, it can be even more excellent than marriage, which ends up worrying a lot about worldly things. And lastly, virginity is a great virtue, but it's not the greatest virtue. It is one you have control over, so perhaps it might be your vocation, but it's not necessarily the highest vocation. And that's that. Next, we move on to lust.